Hey everyone, and welcome to the Sunny Go One Piece podcast. On this episode, we're going to be diving into episodes 671 through 673, which will cover manga chapters 738 through 740. And Operation SOP is underway, but it has been hit with some devastating setbacks, and we will have to see how they recover from it. Alright, so synopsis. As Usopp, Robin, and Leo are trying to take down Sugar and Trebol in the factory, Luffy, Zoro, and Viola are still trying to escape Pika's immense stone powers, while the toy soldier is also trying to make it topside, but more Don Quixote family top executives are beginning to mobilize to stop them all. Alright, so differences. So there are thankfully not as many differences as there were in the last set of episodes. So the few main ones that I found is in episode 671 begins with more filler with 3+ minute long added sequence of Zoro fending off Pika's attacks. Similarly, right after this scene, they draw out the sequence of Lao Ji beating up on the toy soldier as well in the elevator lift area. The anime also adds that Sugar realizes that there's a fake grape in there, and that's why Leo confronts Sugar head on rather than trying to trick her like they intended. This actually fills in kind of a narrative plot hole. Well, it's not a plot hole, but just a narrative hole in the manga, because in the manga, Leo just out of nowhere decides to confront Sugar right off the bat and never even attempts to try and trick her. So this is actually kind of fixing a kind of hole that Oda introduced. I think he just kind of forgot, it seems like, that they were trying to trick her, because it doesn't make sense why Leo would just all of a sudden confront Sugar instead of trying to trick her. So it was good that they had this scene where they did try and trick her, but she actually realizes that it is a fake grape. Another change is the anime changed the order in which Rebecca's mini flashback plays out. In the manga, they showed the flashback where the toy soldier and Rebecca have their sort of argument about her entering the tournament first. Then it cuts to Rebecca attacking Diamante and then getting hit with his flag mace. But the manga doesn't even show that flashback until much later. And then finally, at the beginning of episode 673, the fight between Zoro and Pika is extended much longer, where in the anime it's just one page where it ends with him just kind of annoyed at the fact that there's no end to this and he can't figure out where he should actually attack Pika. Okay, so let's get into the episodes themselves. So in these episodes, we get to see a glimpse into what the Tontada slaves are being made to do and how horribly they're being treated by Doflamingo's henchmen. They're being used for their incredible natural botany skills to help grow and produce the smile fruits in large quantities. However, due to how unnatural they are, it's proving difficult even for them to produce with 100% efficiency. And I wondered at the time if someone were to eat these sort of incomplete, unripened smile fruits, what would happen? And while we don't get the exact answer, we would get a decent idea what would happen if you ate a bad batch of these fruits much later on in the series, and let me tell you, it is not good. I'll explore this a little bit in the spoiler section, but like Leo mentioned, they're all being lied to work harder to produce the smile fruits for what they think is to treat Manchuri's unknown disease, or fake disease, I guess I should say. But I like the little added touch from the toy animators where they have the guard that's giving them this load of BS by having him quickly turn around and put in eye drops to give the appearance of him crying to sell the lie even more. In the manga, this doesn't happen, but he does have one tear running down his eye. And so this way, it makes the lie even more ridiculously bad in the anime, which I think is a nice touch. Now, when it finally returns to Usopp and Robin, Robin has determined that it would be too dangerous to go after Sugar with Trebol standing there guarding her. And one thing I hate about this is that in the manga, it's this continuous sequence leading to the next with Trebol and Sugar transforming Cavendish, then the fly gets shot down. Robin then stops Leo, then the status of the slaves. That scene happens. Then we get to see this scene pretty much uninterrupted. And it's like this nice sequence of one thing leading to the next. But the anime adds so much filler that there's an entire episode and a half worth of material before we even get back to this point. Which again just shows how the filler not only disrupts the pacing, but the flow of the storytelling too. Because this scene was never supposed to be cut up. And so you're waiting forever until that moment where Robin stops Leo, and then you get the explanation almost an episode and a half later. In any case, though, they come up with a plan to separate Trebol by luring him to the docks, leaving Sugar by herself. But Sugar herself isn't just an executive for her ability. She is a formidable foe, as well as the fact that she does deduce that the grape was planted and it was a fake. But not only that, she isn't weak at all physically. And in fact, she seems rather annoyed how people seem to always judge her as being weak due to her childlike appearance. But in reality, she is incredibly strong and a very capable fighter as well. And it makes sense because if we're thinking about, this conservatively, given the flashback, at the youngest, Sugar is like 22 years old. And it is confirmed, in fact, that Sugar at this point is 22 years old I believe it's the Vivera card. But she has had pretty much the same amount of time to train in combat as pretty much any other character. That combined with her crazy devil fruit power, she easily takes down the battalion of Tontada, trying to subdue her and forcefully feed her the Tabasco grape. It's not even a struggle for her, as she instantly takes out like half of them by turning them all into toys and ordering them to turn on their friends, changing the tide of the mission into a very unfavorable position. And I just want to take a minute to talk about how crazy the Hobi Hobi no Mi is. This fruit, in my opinion, is single-handedly one of the most broken and scary devil fruits in existence in the series. All she has to do is touch you, and she essentially gains full control over you, and there seemingly isn't any way to break out of it. But not only that, it erases you from everyone else's memories, so no one is going to come to your rescue since they don't even know you exist. That is a terrifying prospect. And as we see when Robin gets transformed, it brings up a whole new set of questions too, which I don't get into really until the next podcast episode. But yeah, speaking of Robin, can you imagine if in some sort of like Blackbeard type of scenario where you can have two devil fruit powers at the same time and you somehow manage to get both the Hana Hana fruit and the Hobi Hobi fruit? You could literally turn entire armies into toys from range in mass quantities. It would be so freaking OP and terrifying. The ability for this power to turn the forces of an army against one another is insane, as we see how Leo and the remaining Tontada completely forget that their friends even existed and are ready to kill them, while the ones turned into toys have no choice but to follow the orders and kill their friends. And I do wonder if you can break out of this somehow or can avoid being turned with strong enough haki, though. I'll kind of discuss this a little more in the spoiler section because it's something that's always been on my mind. Sugar then alerts Trebol to the trick and calls him back, and this is where things completely fall apart as Trebol displays his immense power by using his Beto Beto powers to fling an entire ship at the tower, which seems a little reckless, but I guess he knows whether Sugar can actually take care of herself more than anyone since he's the one tasked with guarding her all the time, despite the fact that Sugar seems to hate Trebol and constantly tells him to die, and then all Trebol does is he does that stupid annoying laugh, that which is, I don't know, it seems like a running joke, but I find that joke really annoying. I mean, Trebol himself is annoying. But anyways, Trebol's Beta Beta no Mi powers are still a little unclear at this point, whether he's a Logia or a Paramecia. It's never outright stated at this point, and the way he uses it, it's really unclear and could go either way. I think at the time, I originally thought that he probably wasn't a Logia fruit, otherwise someone would have stated that. But of course, this is really the first time we've ever really seen him use the fruit, so it's kind of hard to tell. But I remember that was kind of my initial leaning. Now, before moving on, I have to point out Usopp's cowardice here because this was really the first time in the entire series that it actually bothered me. I know it's part of Usopp's character that he's always scared of things and will eventually come through in a pinch, but the way Usopp kind of is taking advantage of and using the Tontada during this arc really left a bad taste in my mouth during all of this part. Like, I get that no matter what, Usopp's, said at the beginning of the post-time skip era about how he's a new man and no longer part of the weakling trio, he's still gonna be the weakest and most cowardly member of the crew. That's just something Oda has stated and will continue to use that trope, and I'm fine with that. And by now that, after listening to me, if you have been, that I'm a bigger Usopp fan than most, but the way Usopp treats the Tontara and how he uses their kindness and naivety and gullibility to take advantage of them and actively put them in dangerous situations, I felt was wrong even for him. Like, worse yet, once they get caught, he's ready to abandon them and leave them all for dead, which is just so bad. I mean, for me, regardless of how Usopp will redeem himself later on, because we all know that he will eventually come through somehow, I felt this was a little too selfish and mean-spirited, even for Usopp to do. Like, this wasn't just lying to save his own skin, he was actively putting others in danger by giving them a false sense of security and hope. And I may be in the minority on this one because of how he does redeem himself, which is great and is set up by this. But I just think him actively putting others in danger with his lies just really rubbed me the wrong way, regardless of how things turned out. And rewatching this, it hasn't changed, even now knowing the outcome. It doesn't really change the fact that I don't really like Usopp in this part. Not to say that I don't like him as a whole, like even past this or even before this. Like, my opinion of Usopp hasn't necessarily changed that much. But this moment I feel like was really different. And I don't want to say out of character, but just I think Oda went a little too far. And I think the biggest problem I had with Usopp in this arc was that Usopp really didn't suffer any real consequences of treating the Tontara this way. Like, I can forgive Usopp doing this from a character standpoint if he treated them this poorly but suffered some sort of consequence that helped him grow as a person and a character. Then I'd say this is all justified, but there just really isn't anything like that, I feel like, in this arc. Kind of like similar to Enies Lobby, where, yeah, Usopp did some pretty crappy things, like try and attack, his captain and challenge him to a duel, and kind of was pretty selfish. But he suffered the consequences of having to reevaluate himself and then ultimately apologize in a very public way. And then he grew from all of that. But I feel like that's not here really in this arc. And it's hard to get into the specifics without going into spoilers. So I'll definitely come back to this during the arc review, or at least when this sort of arc concludes, or not the arc, but with this whole scene, with the confrontation between Usopp, Trebol, and Sugar. But yeah, I wanted to mention this before I forgot, though, because it is kind of something that really bothers me, and I'll talk a little bit more about this in the next episode as well. I'm not going to say that all of a sudden I hate Usopp or that his moments in this arc aren't great, because they are. They're really great. Like, the highs are really high, but the lows are so low. And this was definitely a big issue for me personally, especially being, an Usopp fan. It's only made even worse when Trebol captures Leo and the others and sets them all on fire. All the while Usopp is talking about abandoning them while Leo is, is severely wounded, and he's still talking about giving up and running while all this is happening, and seeing just how much this means to Leo and the Tontara, as well as everyone in Dressrosa. It really paints Usopp in a horribly negative light that I don't think he has ever really been in, really. Like, for Leo, this is life and death, and there's no going back for them. Either they succeed now, or they're all finished. And the fact that Usopp has treated this so lightly up till now is kind of inexcusable, in my opinion. Now, I know this is set up for a payoff later, but again, it's really hard to watch Usopp be this selfish. Like, things are going, and if that's not bad enough, things are going bad to worse for everyone involved, as Rebecca takes a huge blow from Diamante, knocking her down, which prompts Sabo to have Bartolomeo protect her. At the same time, the toy soldier is getting beat up by Lao Ji at the lift. And it's here we get a scene that was teased in the anime a while back, but this is our first glimpse of the scene in the manga. And it's a pretty emotional scene, but when you first watch the scene, it doesn't quite hit as hard as Oda, I think, wants, in my opinion, because he wants to do the surprise reveal. And so you don't have quite the build-up. And while I like both of these characters, I just don't feel as connected to them as much as I, say I did for Vivi during Arabasta, which isn't necessarily a fair comparison, considering we got much more time to become invested and know who Vivi is. However, upon rewatch, this scene hits way freaking harder for a variety of reasons, which we learn about just after this. And the problem with this scene at this moment in time is that we still don't have the whole story of why these two are now so desperate to throw their lives away for each other, and why they both want so recklessly and desperately to save each other from Doflamingo until the end of this episode and or chapter, when it's finally revealed that the toy soldier is not only Rebecca's father, which we already knew, but we further learn that the toy soldier is none other than the legendary gladiator Kyros, which I and many others had kind of predicted since it was telegraphed pretty hard by Oda that this was the case. Nonetheless, the moment that Leo reveals that the toy soldier is Kyros is a great one. That is, very goosebump inducing. The passion and the desperation from Leo and his voice from actor Kurumi Mamiya is incredible, and you understand why they bet everything on him, because he is the legendary gladiator, and if they can just change him back to a human, he could potentially beat Doflamingo. However, we know that Luffy is going to beat Doflamingo in the end, but it's still an awesome scene. Of course, this revelation enhances that flashback just before it so much more. And so you kind of wish that it was reversed, because it makes what Rebecca says that much more hurtful when she yells at him that he's not even her real father, and that Kyros, the legendary warrior, is just a made-up story. And I did wonder for the future of this arc what Kyros' actual role was going to be if he wasn't going to be the one to actually take down Doflamingo. But then I remembered, thinking about over that kind of week between episodes or chapters, I was waiting, it dawned on me that it was most likely going to be Diamante. He's supposedly the second strongest in the crew, and he's currently the one beating up on Rebecca in the Corrida Coliseum. But it's also the dialogue during that scene where Diamante does strike Rebecca. He does kind of hint that he was the one that actually killed Scarlet that fateful night. So it started to become clear that Oda was setting up a revenge match between Kyros and Diamante at some point down the line. At the lift, several of the remaining Tontara warriors sacrifice themselves to Laoji to allow Kyros, Rampo, and Kabu to move on, but they're almost immediately confronted by yet another Don Quixote executive in Gladius. Gladius, we learn, is the user of the Pamu Pamu no Mi, or the Pop Pop fruit. This is one of the rare fruit names that I think is kind of a stretch in terms of what it's referencing. For the longest time, I had no idea what Pamu Pamu actually was referring to in Japanese. I later found out that it's a reference to pampang, which is an onomatopoeia for something being filled to the brim on the verge of rupturing. And he is referred to as what they call a rupture human, which is quite accurate to what his power is. One other wordplay associated with this fruit is that in Japanese, the word rupture is panku, like when you blow your car tire, you say taya pankushita, which is a reference and a wordplay on punk, as in like steampunk, which is what Gladius's design and wardrobe is based around. So that's kind of all tied together in a very loose reference, I feel like. I always felt like this is the weaker version of the bomb fruit that Mr. Five had. The ability is what he can turn any part of his body along with anything inorganic into essentially balloons that he can inflate to the point that it bursts into a violent explosion. His power always seemed kind of inferior to just making things flat out explode outright, like the bomb fruit. And I will say Oda and Gladius still managed to make this ability a formidable one, especially how he uses himself almost as like a walking shrapnel grenade. And I do find it very creative how Oda uses this fruit, but it does seem like you've already done this but better type of situation. However, for controlling a society of toys, this seems like a really handy ability, as you can just grab any toy and make them explode, as Kyros is almost immediately captured in his grasp after Kabu and Rampo are brutally exploded. And this is one of those moments where even when you know a character is going to be alright, you're left on the edge of your seat wondering how are they going to get out of this situation, because it does seem like all options are gone and it's a little hopeless. And then, just when you think all hope is lost, the thing that you want to hear the most is shouted out loud as a loud-ass jet stamp from nowhere, nailing Gladius square in the gut, sends him flying and saving Kyros. And of course, this is kind of a major Deus Ex Machina and coincidence that Luffy and Viola both happen to be here at this exact moment, but who cares? It's so awesome. One thing I love about this scene is that you've kind of read between the lines how Viola didn't realize that it was Gladius that Luffy just jet stamped, means that Luffy acted so quickly, or that Luffy used his observation haki to sense what was going on and acted almost on instinct to save Kyros, that it didn't even really register to Viola what was actually happening until a few moments after it had already happened, which I think is pretty cool. I also really like this touching sort of mini reunion between Kyros and Viola, because now that we know their real identities, Kyros and Viola are actually siblings-in-law. Kyros married Viola's sister Scarlet, and you can tell by the way Kyros responds to her that it has been painful that she doesn't remember who he is, and they both still very much care for each other, as Viola has been keeping an eye on him and Rebecca. Despite them both being unable to contact each other, they have both been sacrificing and fighting to protect Rebecca and saving Dressrosa in their own ways, which I think is a really nice moment. During this little scuffle with Gladius, as Luffy, Viola, and Kyros manage to escape to the upper floor where the suit chamber is, this is where we were supposed to get the hilarious surprise reveal of where Kinemon and Wicca were, and what they've been up to. And Kinemon finds himself in front of Gladius, but terribly disguised as none other than Doflamingo himself. And this disguise is so bad, it's amazing how it's fooling anyone. And I will say though, he does a pretty decent impression of Doflamingo in terms of his speaking voice, until he freaks out at the news that Kanjuro has disappeared and starts talking in his normal samurai speech pattern by ending his sentences with Gozaru. I thought this scene is so ridiculous but hilarious. Anyways, Luffy, Viola, and Kyros make it to the suit's chamber where Doflamingo is holding law in King Riku. And this is where you really begin to realize just how ill-informed Doflamingo really is, because from his point of view, nothing anyone is doing is making any sense to him due to how quickly things have unfolded with a bunch of disparate groups of people all seemingly working towards a goal that no one should even be aware of. And I love the hilarious irony that Doflamingo is questioning Law as if he's the mastermind of all this chaos, annoying Doflamingo right now. And when Law tells him that he actually has no idea what's going on, he really isn't lying all that much, because to Law, he actually doesn't know what the hell is happening, because he doesn't know about Operation SOP. He doesn't even know that what Frankie's doing. Like, he doesn't realize that Luffy's right there. He's completely in the dark for most of this. All he knows is that they're trying to destroy the factory, which is something Doflamingo already knows, but everything else is completely foreign to him. And I just find that really funny. And this does cross Doflamingo's mind, but he's also like, I don't understand. Luffy and Kyros are ready to attack, but they still need Sugar incapacitated. But things are looking really bad down in the factory. Leo is freaking awesome though. It's at this point I hope that he would join the Straw Hats, and you kind of really hate Usopp a bit for lying to them and using them. Despite the odds really stacked against them with his injuries, he leads the Tontada to continue fighting. And while he just, Usopp just kind of sits back and watches. It sucks. Even as Robin, she sees how desperate they are. She steps up to take up arms, pun intended, to fight alongside them, while Usopp still continues to just sit back and watch until the worst imaginable thing happens. And this actually shocked me when it did happen for the first time. Sugar managed to touch one of Robin's sprouted arms, and thereby turning Robin herself into a toy, because, as we know, any damage that her sprouted limbs receives, she also takes some of that damage as well. And it seems like that includes abilities. And so now a Straw Hat has been turned into a toy. And not only that, she's been forgotten by the rest of the crew as well. And there's a lot to kind of unpack with this, but I'll wait till the next podcast to explore this, as we will see what Usopp's reaction to this is and how it affects him. And let me tell you, I have never hated Usopp more than any other point in this series, because he is just so selfish during all of this. It still kind of upsets me how bad he is during this, especially the next episode. But we'll leave that for the next time. And so yeah, if you did enjoy this, send me a like or comment. And if you want to join me on this journey of rewatching One Piece, please consider subscribing. Check out my Instagram at SunnyGo Podcast for updates on when I post new episodes or to see some pictures of my manga collection. Please check those out. Just listening to the podcast is also enough for me, but if you feel like extra supporting me, feel free to check out my Buy Me a Coffee profile. And as always, I wanted to thank you for taking the time out to listen to my podcast. A couple spoiler topics, not too many, but just a little one. So if you want to stick around for that, please feel free to do so. If not, though, stay safe out there, and I hope to see you on the next episode. Bye. Alright, spoiler section. So, like I always say, this is more so unscripted and just kind of my thoughts. But yeah, I guess the first thing I wanted to talk about is just the imagery of the Tontara being enslaved and that sort of the imagery used for that, of the byproducts of the production polluting the water is very indicative of how Kaido likes to run things, and it's a nice bit of continuity between Doflamingo, who works for Kaido, making these smile fruits, and then Kaido going on to operate very similarly to the Smile Factory, except this time he's creating his weapons production on Wano later on, and it's this sort of like continuous theme between the two, and since they're essentially just doing things exactly the same way. And so I completely forgot about this until this rewatch, and so I thought that was a nice continuity between Dressrosa and Wano. Now, the second thing I wanted to talk about, obviously, is the smile fruit. So, yeah, for this scene, we get to kind of see the smile fruits being produced, and we see how when they're unripened, you don't quite see the little dots actually form in the bottom half of the fruit, and that kind of shows the unripened ones. And while we never figure out like what would happen if you ate one of these unripened ones, whether it just be nothing would happen, or whether what we do learn happens with the defective smile fruits. They seem to be ripe, but they're also still defective. Is obviously the terrible side effect of never being able to show any other emotions other than laughter and smiling, which is that horrifying imagery that happens on Wano. And so yeah, it is interesting to see how the different production of smile fruits is so inconsistent. Not only does it not ripen at 100% rate, but it also, even if it does, it also produces that terrible side effect for almost like 90% of the people who end up eating a smile fruit. And yeah, it's kind of interesting to see just how terrible these fruits are. The last thing I kind of wanted to talk about is more speculative. So with Sugar's power, she can turn people into toys, and it doesn't, especially if she gives you an order, it seems like there's not really much in the way of fighting back, which is incredibly overpowered. But I always wondered, like, if someone had strong enough haki, could they actually break out of it? Because we saw, I think the biggest sort of indication for me that it might be possible is when, after Wano, we saw Law face off against Blackbeard's crew, and during that conflict, Doc Q uses the Siksik fruit to basically turn like all of the heart pirates into women with the feminization disease. And we saw how Law was able to break that with his haki. And so I always wonder, seeing that scene, I wonder if there are some other fruits like the Hobi Hobi no Mi, like whether someone could break out of that with strong enough haki, or whether the contract would prevent them from being able to do that, because obviously then they wouldn't have full control over their willpower anymore, which is what haki is. And so yeah, I often wonder, like, if it can be broken out of with haki, then I don't think it's as broken as it is. But if it can't, then you could easily just enslave someone like Luffy or Law or even Blackbeard or even Kaido for that matter. I also wonder if maybe it's like you can't even actually transform them, even if you touch them to begin with someone who has strong enough haki. Because one other thing, and again, Law is kind of the sort of the use case for this, is but when Law talks about how you can't just like shambles, and Kaido and Big Mom because their haki is too strong. I mean, it could be a case where, yeah, the haki is so strong to begin with that she can't even transform them at all, even if she was able to touch them. So that could be sort of the case with that as well. But it's still pretty unclear as to like how haki interacts with devil fruit powers, and especially with certain types of devil fruit powers. And I feel like Oda is not exactly the most consistent when it comes to that kind of stuff. But yeah, it is something interesting to think about, though, because if it were the case that you could break it up, I think it's a lot more balanced then. If then you'd have people who have strong haki who could break out of it. But even still, I mean, only a handful of people in the entire world has haki that strong. I feel like you're looking at the top of the top who can break out of that, or even prevent that power from working to begin with. You're talking the emperors, and maybe like people slightly below them, like Law or like Kid, and then yeah, obviously like some of the really strong people. But yeah, it's something that's always been on my mind ever since you see how the Hobi Hobi no Mi works, and then you see later on how strong haki can actually nullify certain effects and certain devil fruits. So yeah, anyways, that's pretty much all I wanted to talk about. Thanks for listening to my ramblings, then I'll see you on the next episode. See ya.